Hello. Welcome to the In Love with Business podcast. This miniseries is titled Chief Sustainability Heroes and is hosted by Professor Paolo Tatiki and Melina Corvalia-Shore from University College London, School of Management. Throughout this series, we will talk to sustainability leaders from different organizations and sectors to learn about their sustainability journeys. We will ask them about their career paths, the challenges they encountered in implementing complex strategies of sustainable transformation, and what inspired them along the way. We will also ask what advice they would offer to aspiring chief sustainability officers. Enjoy the episode.
In today's episode, we welcome Jeffrey Whitford, Vice President of Sustainability and Social Business Innovation at Millipore Sigma. Millipore Sigma is a leading biotech research company with headquarters in Burlington, Massachusetts in the United States. Millipore Sigma is the life science division of Merck, a global science and technology company. Today, Merck employs more than 64,000 people across 66 countries worldwide. Jeffrey has been with the organization since 2015, initially joining as the head of global corporate responsibility and life science branding for Merck. In 2023, he transitioned into his current role in the life science division, where he's responsible for the organization's sustainability strategy and the social agenda. Jeffrey, it is a pleasure to have you in our show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Jeff, I think we're going to start with a very simple question. Can you tell us about your background and your path of how you became a chief sustainability officer?
Yeah, so I have I would say, a not traditional path to sustainability. My background is actually in journalism. I have a bachelor's of journalism focused in advertising. So I went to the University of Missouri, which is the kind of creator of journalism as an educational focus area. And I came out of that thinking that I would work at a advertising agency and create campaigns and do fun, cool things. That was not what the future had for me. I had an opportunity that came to me for an internship post-graduation. And my dad said to me, "You've got two choices. You can ask people if they'd like fries with that, or you can go take that internship in St. Louis." And so I packed myself up. No offense to the Golden Arches, but I packed myself up and went to this place called Sigma Aldrich. And that was really the starting point for what has happened, because technically I've worked at the same company my entire career. We were acquired by Merck KGaA Darmstadt, Germany in 2015, as you noted. But I've been in the same organization, and my time with sustainability actually started kind of on the social responsibility side about 6 months after starting that full-time job, after I completed my internship. They asked me if I wanted to help with the community stuff, literally with kind of air quotes around it. And I said, sure. And they had me go see the CFO, and I was like, "I think you've got the wrong person. I don't think I should be going to see the CFO as like a 23-year-old who knows not a whole lot of things." But it worked out, and we started building this kind of thing that was very local at the time. Our headquarters were in St. Louis. We moved it to make it more kind of regional, then it was national, then it went international. But that was the component for me, that when we created an organization focused on sustainability, that's what I was brought in to cover, was the kind of social responsibility, and then the communications, advertising, branding component because of my background. But then my boss left, and they said, "Hey, how about you just figure all of this out?" And now that would never happen, because the field has progressed so much. But I was able to really learn on the job. And so in 2009, I just moved into what we called global citizenship. And I focused all of my efforts at sponging up as much information as I could on all of the topics that I had no clue about, like carbon emissions, green chemistry, engineering, so supply chain. There were just so many. The list of things I didn't know was far longer than the things that I did know. And that's probably still true today. But I think for me, it's a journey that you wouldn't necessarily have seen. But one of the things that I love about what I get to do is I bring a different perspective to the conversation. And I think we all have, different perspectives that we bring. But especially in a science-based company, I am really an outsider. But it also allows me to kind of push boundaries in a different way that maybe others might not have been able to do.
Fantastic. And our field, Jeff, is really evolving faster. And I look at what I'm doing today in research and in projects, and it's very different from what I was doing 10 years ago. So can you tell us how your job as a CSO changed over time? So what are you doing today compared to what you were doing in the past?
It's funny, and I was just thinking about this. I literally have a piece of paper, and this is from like back in the day. So this is like early days.
I
You
love
can
it.
see big map. But what's interesting about that, and I came across it and I keep it here. But what's interesting about that is the big frame hasn't changed, and I love
Okay.
that about that because maybe it's a little bit of validation that I wasn't completely off the mark. But I think, Paolo, when you think about what has shifted, it is the specificity of which I'm doing what I do. It is the scale of which I'm doing what I'm doing.
Mm.
Because before, this was really more of a kind of like, I think people would be like, oh, there's Jeffrey working in his own in a little corner in one of our buildings talking about this topic that no one's going to care about. And what has transformed or transpired is that it's become extremely relevant, right? It
Yeah.
is now a
It's
competitive,
mainstream.
totally mainstream. There's zero question. You think back to kind of those first articles that were in HBR, and it was like, will it or won't it around sustainability? And now the answer is very clear. It will, and it's here with a vengeance. But the relevancy, the criticality of what is happening right now is what is also driving that difference of how I'm being empowered, right? I'm usually not one who sits back and waits for permission. I'm in the ask forgiveness camp. And so I think that's what's changed is I'm bolder with the things that I'm going after and talking about because I see the opportunities, the impacts that we as an organization can have. We're a global business. We sell close to 11 billion euro of products on an annual basis, and that's just continuing to grow. And if you think about it, science is at the starting point of so many things, whether it's medications, treatments, therapies that
Absolutely.
help people's lives, but it can also be in so many other things, technologies that we use that are not related to healthcare that we are at the starting point of. And if you think about that, if you can get things right at the start and do them better at the start, that's the power and the impact of, I think, what happens. And so I think that's what I think about now that's different is the scale of which I'm working is I need to have a much bigger vision of what's possible and what we can do.
Fantastic.
Very cool.
Melina, over to you.
Yeah, so Jeffrey, I think your background is fascinating. As you said, it's maybe not the traditional place to start in terms of this field, but it allows you to bring different perspectives. So in your perspective, how would you define the role of Chief Sustainability Officer, given the experience you now have in this role?
Yeah, I think my time within this role is really about the success that I can have at being an advocate and an influencer, right? I can't really do command and control, right? Go do this, do that. That's not how this works. My role and the success of me in this role is my ability to build partnerships with our organization, with external stakeholders, to help them understand why this is going to be beneficial for them. Why does it matter? Why is it important? Why can it change, the outlook or trajectory for whoever that individual is or what they're doing? And I think if I can be a successful influencer in that, and I don't mean like social media influencer,
Yeah.
I mean really influencing right?
You never know. With this podcast, you could become a social media influencer.
Maybe I don't know. Yeah, it could be the launching pad. I don't know how good I'd be at it, but what I think about is the conversations and the framing about how a choice affects more things and why is that beneficial? Because what we recognize is that people don't necessarily think of sustainability as the lens that they're using when they make decisions. And so our ability to change that, to embed that into the business, has really been a core part of what I'm focused about and doing. And I think so my role is influencing people to think differently about what the future is, what our impact can be. And to be honest, working with the business and our leadership to shift the perception of who we are as a business. You know, our business has been around for 355 years. Like, it's so old. I was in Germany. I was doing an expat assignment during our 350th celebration, and just the
Wow.
history, the family. I think we're on the 13th or 14th generation of the Merck family, and that is such a legacy. And you think about a company like that, that legacy is now, how do we add to and build on to this remarkable thing that they've created, but do something that is transformative, that is different. And I think that's where I am always energized by what I get to do. Is that's one of the things that I get to be part of, that next chapter of creating and the reinvention. And we talk about the number of reinventions that we as an organization have had, but this is another chapter in that process, and I get to play a part of it, which is fantastic, with a bunch of colleagues. So that's, I think, what I see my role is part of the reinvention.
And that is it's an incredible long-standing history of the company. When you think about sustainability, that's part of what it means, right? To be there for the long term. So when you think about the challenges facing companies today, you touched on being influential is a key factor. So how would you describe addressing those challenges, like within this role? Is being an influencer? Are there other key aspects that can help you address those challenges?
Yeah, I think this is where my background does help me in terms of that strategic communication, because I'm really thinking about the framing of this myriad of things that we're doing, right? You know, I had a boss who asked me, as we were kind of planning and prepping the next kind of bolus of work that we were doing, said, you know, could we just do 2 or 3 projects? And I was like, I wish that I could just do 2 to 3 things, and much simpler. But the
Yeah.
reality is that the communication component here is, how do you connect the dots between the reasons why we're doing all of these things? And I think that's the piece that, to be effective at this for organizations, you have to be able to connect things like the data sources to understand where the impact is coming from, but then also to explain why the actions you're going to take or the strategy that you are implementing is going to be effective at changing the course of where your emissions footprint sits, where your water footprint sits, how you are dealing with social sustainability issues, thinking about human rights, other topics. All of that factors into being able to tell a compelling, comprehensive, and data-rich story that connects with business leaders to say this is a business imperative. And I think that's really where you find people who, I think some of the more successful organizations, you see that combination of things, right? There's really good data. There's a really impressive and thoughtful story that's clear about using that data to anchor the work from a sustainability standpoint. So I think that's, you know, I'm not to say there's technical challenges that go with sustainability as well,
Yeah.
but I think some of them are easy communications challenges that if we looked at them differently and put them in the context of business, I think it's such a powerful tool. I started this role right when I went back to get my MBA, and you definitely see this infusion of an opportunistic, and I don't mean that in a slimy way from a business standpoint,
Yeah.
but like a possibility and entrepreneurial view is really how I approach most topics. And I think a lot of people come at this from a risk-based methodology, and I don't necessarily see the benefits of limiting things with a risk-based approach. When I look at it, I want to say, what's in front of me? What can we accomplish? What could be transformationally different? And so I think, you know, a compelling vision, well communicated, anchored in really good quality data, that is probably a challenge that a lot of people are still working through.
Right. I think that's a great way to
absolutely.
look
And I
at
think
it.
Yeah, and Melina, Jeffrey is touching on many topics and perspectives that, in fact, we covered in our book, Sustainable Transformation Strategy, where, first of all, we speak about the evolution of sustainability as a topic that in the past was about really, responsibility, marketing, compliance. Then it became a risk topic. But today, the big revolution is that sustainability is an opportunity topic. And this is kind of very exciting, and is kind of really making sustainability a strategy topic. It's really, interesting to see now organizations realizing the full potential of sustainable transformation. You also said something very interesting, something that we observed in many case studies that we presented in our book. That is, the importance of finding the right narratives in business to communicate sustainability. I guess that is something very, very important, and I definitely share the same vision on that. Something I found a challenge in my job, and it's probably challenging in your job as well, is that in this space of sustainability you have many ESG topics, and you can't be an expert, I guess, of everything. But you need to have some basic knowledge of all of these topics, and you need to always, I guess, evolve your know-how and update your skills. How do you do that as a CSO, Jeffrey?
That part is a little bit exhausting. I'm not going to lie. The EU is really keeping me on my toes to try to keep up with all of these regulations. But I think one of the things that I do is I try to have a diverse source of information that I am taking a hold of, right? So I don't get caught in an echo chamber where it's just reinforcing one narrative, right? I really try to make sure that I'm digesting information from a variety of sources to get a variety of perspectives that is, more international, right? Like, currently you find me in the US today. How do I make sure that I'm not caught in a US view of this? Because that's definitely one lens, and there's a definitely different lens in different parts of the world. And then once you get into different subject matter areas, but I think you're right. There's a dizzying amount of information in terms of the things that you may feel pressured to have a good handle on the depth and breadth. What I've learned, and I say this often, is I'm going to be wrong multiple times a day, and I just accepted it. But what I always try to be is a person who is a sponge for information and learning. So if I recognize a topic where I don't feel well enough informed, right, it's something I will go off and dig in deeper to, and that's that natural curiosity that I think has kind of just instilled in me, that has gotten me to be proficient enough to be able to talk about chemistry in a way that, like, unless you're a technical expert, we get too deep in the details, right? I'm fairly convincing because I know enough now, because I've listened to experts, right? I've read and dug deeper. But the other thing I think is relying and having a team of people who are strengthening the parts where you are weak in. And that's where I am remarkably blessed. I've got a team of 30 plus people who have a remarkable just history of different topics, whether that's in plastics recycling, and can go deep into those topics where I may be able to cover, bigger macro scale things like the economic model of why recycling is important to figure out. But then there's the technical challenges that I will never be able to get into the depth and detail of. So it's a combination of having a network of places where I can go that can provide me with expert opinions, but also when I feel those kind of things in my stomach that are like, "Oh, I don't know about that," that I dig in deeper and I'm finding information sources that can help upskill me so that I'm ready to at least ask questions, because I think that's what it's all about. There are few things that I'm going to say I'm very certain of, that I will just go in guns and with full confidence. But I think there are a lot of other things where I am more apt to ask questions because the questions in the conversation help, I think, all of us gain clarity and kind of test those premises that we've got.
And in this part of the world, Jeff, in Europe, there are, I guess, two big topics that have been really central in the sustainability roadmaps of many organizations. And I'm referring to, on one side, the road to net zero, which is a complex one, and maybe we will touch on that later, and the topic of equality, diversity, and inclusion, two big agenda items. What do you recognize as important topics that might become core in the next 5 years?
Yeah, and I think such great examples, Paolo, in terms of how those topics are translated in different ways in different places, right? In Germany, there was a lot of conversation when I was there around diversity of thought, because there wasn't as big of a focus as we have maybe here in the U.S. on things like diversity of ethnicity, which is a
Correct.
huge topic. And so there's that realization of the differences that exist here in terms of these definitions and the importance of the dialogue to have conversations to gain some common understanding and acknowledge those differences
Yeah.
and really be clear that it's not one solution in all places. That's the
Yeah.
reality.
And I guess this doesn't make it easier for a global organization,
Doesn't
right?
it makes it all sorts of challenging because there are certain things that you have conversations about. We have a program and it is available in Europe as well. So it's a shipping container that we've transformed into a mobile science lab that moves across the continent and in the UK and in Ireland. So it hits up some islands as well. But we've got that same concept here in the US. And the main idea of that, though, is to really reach underprivileged students who have typically been excluded in the sciences. And in the US, that means children of color and girls. That's the audiences that have not really been included. Well, when you move that into other places, those topics still exist. They exist in a different form or fashion. And sometimes those are much more culturally sensitive to talk about. And we're having to figure out how we navigate those conversations to really raise it without pointing fingers, because that's not what it's about. But it's just to remind ourselves that we need to be inclusive. At the end of the day, what's that kind of centralizing message? And it's about inclusivity, right? How do we make sure everyone is welcome at the table so that they can participate? As you think about the topics, though, that kind of are coming around the corner, I mean, no surprise around things like supply chain. This is like
Massive.
it's a massive thing that is also another microcosm of what we've been dealing with kind of in-house, right? So if you get your house in order, now you're like, oh, wait a minute, we get to go do this with, in our case, 30,000 other organizations to help them on that journey as well. And the reality is, as you get deeper into supply chains, the maturity level and the capabilities change dramatically, right? Because, let's be honest, I am privileged to have a team the size of the team that I have working on
Of
these
course.
topics. And in a lot of the small, medium enterprises that we do business with, I was fortunate enough to do a 1-year rotation in procurement. At the time, it was right before I started this role back in 2009. At the time, I was like, this is the end of my career. Why am I in procurement? But it was the thing that actually helped me understand how our business worked. And something that sticks with me is that I purchased snake venom from a man in Louisiana. And I ask myself now, does that man in Louisiana understand his CO2 footprint? Does he understand topics around things like animal welfare? Does he understand things like, forced labor? It's a one-person shop, so it's only him. But you think about all of the different topics that could be relevant to him. Now, granted, that's going to be a small footprint, but still, it highlights the challenge that's in front of all of us and how we have to be thinking about this differently. And I think you talk about things like engagement strategy, right? And you heard me talk about partnership and working together. I think this is a huge challenge for us because I'm on the receiving end of customers saying, well, we need this data, we need that. And it's not necessarily in this sense or the spirit of partnership. It feels more kind of like there's not a carrot there, but there's definitely a stick. And my kind of premise, I just question, is that how we're going to do this? Is this how we're going to be successful to shift the world, to change how we're doing business? Or going back to that opportunities and kind of possibilities mindset, can we set out a different vision about what that means for these smaller companies who are struggling with resource, right? Like they don't have the people to do this. And it could be a mom and pop organization who is running on very lean margins. Feels like another cost, another kind of
cost of doing business. Yeah.
But can it be viewed in a different fashion? Can we get creative with the mechanisms that can reward them? Could it be more business for doing things in a more responsible, sustainable fashion? Could it be better payment terms for what they're doing? And I think that's really when we think about the shift that needs to happen. We need a lot of people to rapidly shift about their thought patterns around the supply chain and how we work with this to advance it forward in a meaningful fashion.
Yeah. So I'm smiling because you touched on something that I typically discuss with students in the first lecture of my MBA module, and we kind of discuss the challenge associated to transforming supply chains, and how existing business models not necessarily are fit for purpose from a sustainability perspective. And we basically end up discussing that at times it could be necessary to redistribute margin in supply chains in a different way. and that's that's where what you were suggesting, and this is a revolution. If we get to that point, we are really kind of rethinking capitalism. Do you think that we're getting there, Jeff?
So I think this is exactly, Paolo. It's great to hear this because, we're kind of embarking on these conversations with our leadership, kind of nervously, because to your point, we're asking them to kind of rethink the way that business has been done for decades plus. And, I have not gotten shot down just yet, right? I've also not gotten the green light. So, we're not fully there. But I think there's more openness to understanding this whole mechanism of what are the levers you have to be able to make change within the marketplace. And my leadership, I'll give them a lot of credit. I think part of it goes back to really painting a good picture for them of what we were going to need to do and what all was going to be required. But they have really backed us when it came to making some bets that seemed maybe different than what you would typically do, from looking at a strategy and saying, okay, we're going to go do those things. And let me give you one example of it. And it starts to show you, I think, the direction that our leadership team is headed in moving us in a different way of looking at this. So one of the pieces of my kind of discovery through the past years of having conversations with customers, especially academic customers. So, you go to any academic institution, you could go to UCL, you can go to Cambridge, Oxford, Harvard, Cal, name the organization. There's not a lot of green chemistry being taught in chemistry departments around the world. Now, if you need scientists to be able to implement and drive sustainability into the work that they're doing, they've got to change these chemical reactions that they've literally been doing for decades, and in some cases, centuries, the history behind some of this. Now, there was a certain academic institution in the UK that's very storied. They had no green chemistry curriculum. They did 1 3-hour, and I don't mean 3 hours in a semester, I mean 3 literal hours with 5 PhD students on green chemistry. So I went and took this information and said, what could we do about this? Because if I'm trying to get people to do things differently in practice, I've got to change that.
Yeah.
And so that became the suggestion to partner with a nonprofit organization who's been working in green chemistry education, but is yet to get kind of the scale.
Yeah.
And so I suggested a multi-million-dollar, multi-year partnership to help them scale to work with the academic institutions. We're not involved in that component. We support them, but we are not involved in creating the curriculum, or we don't control any of that. But the whole point is, if you're going to change the system and you're looking at the strategic levers, which was what I was tasked with, I put something forward to our organization that was not the norm. And they said yes. They connected the dots between why that mattered with the success of this bigger long-term thing. And so I think, Paolo, that gives me confidence.
Yeah.
I may not win on all of them, but it gives me confidence to make these asks that may seem different or not
Yeah.
traditional. And I do think we are starting to move in some different directions that separate us.
I just realized I should have invited today my father, because my father is a retired professor in chemistry, and he was the president in Italy of the Green Chemistry Society for years.
I
So
love
he's very passionate about the topic of green chemistry, and probably his passion is one of the reasons why I became a sustainability professor.
You'll have to make the
But, you know,
introduction
this
after.
is fascinating. Yeah. Melina, over to you.
That's great. So Jeffrey, I mean, the goals and the targets are big and I'm sure this varies depending on the size of an organization as well. But can you touch on what the resources are? What are the resources that are most needed for an organization to achieve its goals?
Yeah. I think right now you have got to have really clear outcomes of what you're trying to accomplish. That sets the tone for then understanding how you're resourcing and where are you resourcing your organization to begin to address, adapt, change to what the future state you're looking to achieve. And for us, that was one of the things that kind of this big process that we went through, right? We had been fortunate enough to be building this portfolio of work for a very long time. You know, starting in 2009, I kind of had quite a head start. So when I went in for the big ask, you know, when I was kind of said, tell us what you need, and then we'll figure it out from there.
Mm-hmm.
It really was thinking about, okay, how do we take what we've got and scale it up? And I'll be honest, you know, some of the things I would say I nailed head on. Other things I have missed in terms of maybe where we needed to resource or how we needed to resource. And then you throw in another kicker is the environment we find ourselves in, right? You know, COVID for us was a very busy time of business because we were the people who were kind of the background providing all of the things to the people who were making the vaccines to make the vaccines available, right? So the bags that they were mixed in, the mRNA, the testing components to make the diagnostic test, those were all things that are core to our business. And so the ramp for that was significant. Well, that was not forever, right? And so the business environment has changed. Now we're coming out of that, but it also changes your resourcing capabilities and availability. So I think you are looking at an environment that's very dynamic and it's changing. And so you're going to have to accept, right, that it may not be. I think sometimes in sustainability, we kind of are like a punished child at times. We're like, well, why don't you like us anymore? I certainly have had that moment. I'm like, why don't you want to resource this or that? And I have to stop myself and remind myself, one, we're very fortunate with how we've been resourced. But I think the kind of place where a lot of people are at, right? You're getting your house in order. And that takes a lot of effort to kind of shift how things have been done. And so we're in this interesting kind of in-between period of figuring out how we transition the support that we've had for the changing the internal things to now shifting and thinking about the external resourcing and how we work with different departments who have responsibility for supply chain relationships in our procurement department, for instance, or any other touch points that kind of go out. But that's really one of the things I encourage people to think about is it's very easy to just look at the here and now. But if you can challenge yourself about thinking about that future state, this is where I could have used, you know, some more prodding to think about a little bit differently how I would resource what we would do. Because one, it's going to be lean. Let's be honest. We don't need we shouldn't be getting armies of people together. That's probably not the answer. But can we be lean and effective in thinking about how we can have organizational uptake and be systematic in the implementation of sustainability? That is, you know, that's what our leadership said to me is like, we want you to do this systematically. You're not building a kingdom. Great. Got it. But the systematic piece can be tough. And so thinking about the resources and knowledge and the really, I go back to partnerships, right? I need to be effective at building partnerships so that I can have people in other places who are not necessarily part of my team, but who are driving this forward because they've said, yep, I get it. I understand what you need from me, and I can work that in with the rest of what I'm doing.
This is very interesting, Jeff. I guess I have two more questions for you today. The first one is about what is happening this week in Dubai. So we are kind of recording this podcast when COP28 is taking place in Dubai. There is, of course, a lot of attention on COP events. They are important. Are you optimistic about our future, about the role a business is going to play to get there? What's your perception?
Yeah. If you read the things coming out of COP, you can get depressed easily, right?
Yeah.
I am an optimist. I'm always going to look at what the possibilities in front of us, and I may not be fully digesting the importance of some of these things. I understand it, but I think we also have to look at reality. Did we really think going into this that we were going to have countries whose economic viability is related to the production of oil, and then being like, yeah, we don't need it anymore. It's good. Let's throw it away. Probably not. But I think, Paolo, the thing that you mentioned about the opportunity that business has, 100%. Like, if what I see, and having done this now for a while, you see changes happening that before, like even within our organization, people I think used to laugh at me. We'll be honest. It's okay. Like, there were laughs happening. They're like, that is never going to happen. That he is off his rocker if he thinks any of this is going to materialize. And I'm not going to say it's all materialized, but now I ran into somebody at the airport and they said to me, when you were talking about that green solvent, we were just like, that was never going to happen. And like, here it is. It is now kind of a center feature of a new approach that's being taken and adopted by the business. I'm not sitting there like saying, haha, I told you so. But it is a reinforcer that says we are going to need to be resilient, right? It's so easy to look at any one of these things and just say, I'm out. I'm done. This is too much of this. But I choose to say there's more opportunities. There are more places for us to look and say we could do that differently, because it comes with that persistence. And this is the thing, is we need this range of people, right? We need the people who are over here, who are vocally fighting the fight to get these things taken care of.
Yeah.
But we also have to recognize they might not be the people who are going to deliver the action. They could deliver the noise, and the noise attracts attention. And then there can be those maybe in the middle who are working to figure out, how do you operationalize what you're hearing from people about the issues and what needs to happen. And I think that's really where I find myself, is you're going to get me with my sleeves rolled up, trying to figure out, how do we make these things happen? Every day when I touch almost anything, I'm thinking about, how was that produced? How could that be done differently? Could I change my buying behaviors? Because I think it's a combination of all the things. And so it's not going to be just one thing. We're going to need people who are continuing to kind of raise their voice to advocate for massive change. And then we're going to need the people who are working to figure out, how do they actually change the function of business, and realize that even though there's going to be setbacks along the way, we have to keep pushing. Like, okay, maybe we don't achieve whatever it is, but that's not going to stop me from figuring out the systematic ways that I can bring about meaningful change. And I think that has been the driving factor of my work, is impact. And if I can't have a bigger impact than what I can have personally, I'm not doing something right. And so I use that as my benchmark to say, how do I not get drugged down in the depressing headlines? How do I not get passive about taking action because it doesn't look like we might make it? Well, one thing we've learned, science isn't always right all the time, right? New information comes in, new data comes in. You just never know, and you got to keep pushing. And I think that's the takeaway, is it could be right around the corner and we just don't know it. But if we don't keep trying, we're not going to find out.
Right.
Absolutely. And Jeffrey, I'm sure there could be, for example, fresh graduates listening or watching this podcast, maybe dreaming a career in sustainability, maybe dreaming to become a CSO one day. What is your advice to them?
There's probably a lot, but one of the things is the joke that I always make is my junior year high school chemistry teacher would be like, "No way is Jeffrey Whitford head of sustainability at a science company." None of these things add up. But one of the things I think I say is you never know. But if you think about this, be focused in the outcomes. Be focused in the rigor, in the detail, in the data. We need people, we need a lot more people to be interested in this topic, to make these and take these decisions into how they live everyday life. And so you can have the impact and be in a role like mine. You can work to influence your senior leaders, the organizations you work for, these big multinational global institutions. We need that, but we also need people who are changing their buying behaviors. So it all comes together. So I think, be focused on impact. That is probably my biggest thing. And dream big. We need people who are willing to dream big, who are, as I said before, resilient. I say to my team, we are going to run into the brick wall, slide down, to pick ourselves up, and keep rinsing and repeating that for a lot of times. Because what we're doing is it's not easy. It is tough work. And I think that's just a recognition that you really do have to be resilient in this. And you take one day's defeat and it becomes tomorrow's victory. And you just know if it's not today, it's going to come. There will be the day. And you just have to keep driving for it. But I get to see these outcomes happen on a daily basis. Some of them are very small. Some of them are bigger. But to see the progress that we as an organization have made, by the end of 2025, our business is going to be matching 90% of our electricity with renewable electricity that we have brought onto the grid, brand new electricity. It's great,
Wow.
right? These are the types of things that fundamentally shifted a huge DAX 40 company in a different direction. And that's because of advocacy from our team to make that happen and a willingness of a lot of other people to bring it over the finish line. So I think that's the thing is you just have to dream big. And maybe it is a wildly inaccurate belief, but I do believe it's possible.
I love this, and I think it's a very inspiring way to close this episode. Jeffrey, it was fantastic to have you in our show. Thank you very much. Congratulations for the fantastic work you are doing, and I hope to meet you again soon in London.
Yes, absolutely. It was great to spend time with both of you. Thank you for having me, and it's great to see these conversations continue and to grow and scale. And thank you for leading them and bringing them together.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this discussion, we invite you to like and share this episode on your social media. Enjoy the rest of your day.